The courtroom was packed, the air heavy with tension and whispers. At the center sat a frail widow, her hands trembling as she clutched a stack of old, faded papers, the only proof she had left of the home she once shared with her late husband. Across from her, the wealthy developer smirked, surrounded by lawyers in sharp suits. The judge, looking impatient, sighed as if her story was just another waste of time. When the widow's voice cracked, explaining how her land had been taken, a small chuckle escaped the bench, soft, but cruel enough to echo through the room. The people watching fell silent. It wasn't just a case anymore. It was humiliation playing out in real time. No one expected what happened next. Just as the judge was about to dismiss the case, the heavy doors at the back of the courtroom swung open. The sound of boots hitting the floor filled the air. Slow, deliberate, united. A group of bikers, dressed in leather jackets, marked with the same insignia, walked in. Their leader removed his helmet, revealing eyes filled with quiet rage and purpose. The crowd turned, whispering in disbelief. The judge froze, his smirk fading. No one knew who they were, or why they were there, but the widow looked up for the first time with hope in her eyes. Something told everyone watching that justice was about to take an unexpected turn. The courtroom fell silent as the bikers took their seats in the back, their presence alone shifting the atmosphere. The widow glanced at them nervously, but there was a spark of recognition in her eyes, a flicker of something deeper than surprise. The judge cleared his throat, trying to regain control, but the tremor in his voice betrayed his unease. Everyone could sense that these men hadn't come just to watch. Outside the courthouse, whispers had already started spreading. The local news had covered the widow's story, a woman fighting alone after losing her husband in an accident that left her with nothing but debts and memories. Her land, once a small farm, had been sold off without her consent through legal loopholes she didn't understand. For months, she begged for help, but no one listened, until one night, a group of riders pulled up to her tiny house, offering not charity, but solidarity. They called themselves the Iron Guardians, veterans, mechanics, and everyday men who stood up for those forgotten by the system. They'd seen her husband's name before. He was one of them years ago, before illness took him, and now, they were here to finish what he couldn't. Inside, the widow's lawyer tried to speak, but the judge's eyes kept darting toward the bikers. The developer shifted in his seat, his confidence cracking. The tension in the room thickened. Everyone could feel it. Justice was about to meet something far stronger than fear. The judge leaned back, trying to appear composed, but his hands fidgeted with the pen on his desk. The widow's lawyer stood and began recounting how the property had been sold under suspicious conditions, missing signatures, forged dates, and documents filed late at night. The developer's attorney interrupted, confident and smug, insisting everything was legal. But his words didn't land the same way anymore. The presence of the bikers had changed the energy in the room. Every word now carried weight. From the back, the leader of the Iron Guardians watched quietly, his eyes locked on the judge. To everyone else, he looked intimidating, but to the widow, he was a reminder that she wasn't alone. Between testimonies, she kept her eyes down, replaying the last promise her husband made before he passed, that he'd protect their home, no matter what. She didn't know his old friends would be the ones to make sure he kept that promise. Meanwhile, whispers grew louder in the hallway. Reporters had gathered, curious why a group of bikers was sitting in a courtroom meant for a land dispute. Some speculated they were there for intimidation, others said they were witnesses, but none knew the truth that the Iron Guardians had uncovered something dark, something that could expose corruption at the highest level of the county. Inside, the judge called for a short recess. The moment his gavel struck, the widow turned toward the bikers. Their leader gave a slow nod, silent but certain. The real fight, it seemed, hadn't even begun yet. When the court reconvened, the air felt heavier than before. The widow sat straighter now, her fear replaced with quiet strength. The bikers didn't move, but their presence alone spoke louder than any words. The judge looked uneasy, and even the developer, once so sure of himself, kept glancing toward the back of the room. The tension was so thick that every creak of the wooden benches made heads turn. The widow's lawyer approached the bench again, holding a new folder, one that hadn't been part of the earlier evidence. "Your Honor," he said, his voice steady, "we've obtained additional documents that raise serious questions about this land transfer." The courtroom murmured. The developer's lawyer immediately objected, but the judge hesitated before responding. Something about the sudden confidence in the widow's side made him pause. Asterisk? Then, the leader of the Iron Guardians stood up. The courtroom fell silent. He walked slowly toward the front, his boots echoing against the marble floor. "Your Honor," he said respectfully, "we believe you should see what's inside this file." The judge's face paled slightly as he nodded for it to be handed over. The papers contained signed statements, photographs, and records, proof that the developer had worked with officials to seize multiple properties illegally, not just the widow's. The judge's hand trembled as he turned the pages. The crowd leaned forward, whispering. The widow watched, her heart pounding. Everyone knew the truth was finally surfacing, but what no one knew yet was how far the powerful men behind it would go to keep it buried. Just as the judge began to speak, the courtroom doors burst open again. This time, it wasn't another group of bikers, it was two men in suits. carrying official-looking briefcases and badges clipped to their belts. The room fell into a stunned hush. They walked straight toward the judge, whispering something that made his expression change instantly from confusion to alarm. The tension that had been building all morning suddenly reached a boiling point. The widow looked around, unsure if this was good news or another trick. The bikers stayed still, watching every move carefully. The developer leaned back in his chair with a faint, nervous smile, as if he knew something no one else did. The judge cleared his throat, visibly shaken. "We'll need to pause these proceedings," he said, his voice unsteady. But before he could continue, the Iron Guardian's leader stepped forward. "Not this time, Your Honor," he said firmly. "You've seen the proof. The people deserve to hear it." One of the men in suits turned toward the bikers, warning them to stand down. But the crowd, sensing the truth being silenced again, began to murmur in anger. Phones came out. Cameras flashed. Everyone wanted to know what was really going on. The widow clutched her late husband's wedding ring in her palm, her heart racing. She realized this was bigger than just her land. It was about power, truth, and the courage to stand against both. And in that moment, no one could predict what would happen next. The courtroom erupted into chaos. Reporters pushed closer, their cameras flashing as the two officials demanded silence. The judge banged his gavel, but no one was listening anymore. The Iron Guardians stood like a wall behind the widow, their leader's voice cutting through the noise. "You can't hide this," he said, his tone calm but powerful. "We already sent copies of that evidence to the state office and every local news outlet." The judge froze. The men in suits exchanged a worried glance. The damage was already done. The widow's lawyer opened the folder once more, showing one last document, a signed statement from a clerk who had confessed to falsifying the records under pressure from the developer's company. Gasps filled the room. The developer's face turned pale as the judge demanded an explanation. He tried to speak, but his voice broke. "It wasn't just me," he blurted out. "The orders came from higher up." That's when the unexpected happened. The leader of the Iron Guardians reached into his jacket, not for a weapon, but for a small, faded photograph. The widow's late husband standing beside the very same judge decades ago. "He trusted you," the biker said softly. "He thought you stood for justice." The judge's eyes filled with shame. For a moment, no one spoke.